Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Reacting to some news, the Toronto Raptors, Masai Ujiri said after the trade deadline we had 5 open roster spots that he was looking to make plays, make waves on the buyout market, and he's living up to his words as he's already signed 2 players to 10-day contracts. Malcolm Miller and Ben McLemore have been officially signed by the Toronto Raptors to 10 days, which are 2 3-point shooters, and we'll get into those players now. We actually had a video breaking down the buyout market recorded yesterday, but a lot of that has become irrelevant with these 2 signings and Wayne Ellington being signed by the Detroit Pistons and Markieff Morris, his injury, and his whole situation. We'll probably have an updated buyout market look ahead come in the next couple days when things start to simmer down, but you know, the Toronto Raptors are already out here making moves, and we signed 2 players that kind of, you know, obviously in the buyout market you're not going to get top-notch NBA players, established guys throughout the league. They're guys that currently aren't on a roster. But these players that Masai Ujiri signed fill, you know, their specialties, their skills fit what the Raptors need. And we can bring the best characteristics out of these players. I think they can, you know, definitely have an impact on the team. The first guy that we'll have a look at is probably the lesser interesting but safer pickup in my opinion is Malcolm Miller, as he was on the roster last season. He knows the Toronto Raptors system. He's been involved with the organization. He's played for the 905, and the reason he didn't remain on the roster, you know, the reason Lorenzo Brown stayed and he did not, was because he had unfortunately suffered a shoulder injury this summer. It was similar to the shoulder injury DeLon Wright had about 2 seasons ago. He had a torn labrum in his right shoulder, had surgery, so unfortunately, he couldn't be on the roster. We wanted to fill out the back end with players that could actually play, but we signed him to a 10-day at the beginning of the season and sent him down with our G League team in hopes that when he gets healthy, when he gets back in full form, he could compete for the roster spot once again, because people that watched the Toronto Raptors last year, and I mentioned on a few pods, Malcolm Miller looked pretty good. He looked pretty good for like a 14th, 15th guy on the roster, and he's 24 years old. He's entering, you know, his peak years now. Obviously, he's only been in the league. Last year was his rookie season, but in extremely limited minutes last year, he averaged close to 3 points per game. He shot 38% from the 3-point line, had a rebound in about 8 minutes. You know, he started 4 games, which is actually pretty solid for a guy who, you know, who's a 4th-string wing player. That was the role that he had for the Toronto Raptors last season. And looking at these guys, these buyout market players, you know, the stats aren't really going to reflect what they do because they don't play that too many minutes on their respective rosters, and Malcolm Miller didn't play too much for the Raptors last season. And with such a small sample size, it's hard to extrapolate the player that we're actually getting because, you know, we've seen guys like even Bruno. Actually, Bruno's been pretty good for the Memphis Grizzlies as of late. Want to give a shout out to my guy Bruno, but you know, he had his rookie year, he came in that one game against the Bucks and put in about 8 points, and then his per minute percentages and all that sort of stuff went up crazy, and then his next 2 seasons really didn't do anything. So it's hard to get an accurate assessment of players just looking at their stats, just looking at that sort of stuff. But watching Malcolm Miller play, one thing that I was very impressed with him last season is he comes into the game ready to shoot. You know, it's something CJ Miles has struggled with this season, and it's, you know, not having to be in a groove. He can be cold and coming off the bench and knock down a shot. You know, Chris Boucher's shown an ability to do it as well, and it's a pretty solid skill because obviously Malcolm Miller probably isn't going to fill a very significant role with this team in the sense he's going to be a, you know, 20-minute, 25-minute a night guy. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's probably not the role he's going to fulfill, and the Toronto Raptors need some shooting. And the fact that Malcolm Miller doesn't have to play very extended minutes and still being able to shoot the threes, that's certainly a skill that the Toronto Raptors are looking for in these buyout market players. You know, body-wise, he'll fit right in. He's a pretty solid defender, pretty solid rebounder, especially for the small forward position. You know, he's 6'7", 210. He's a solid body. He's a solid body. He definitely doesn't do anything very poorly on the court. You know, obviously we haven't seen much of a sample size to really get to know Malcolm Miller. Maybe he's a lot better than we expect, a lot worse than we expect. We don't really know. But one thing's for certain, he's going to get his opportunity. You know, we've seen inconsistencies from our current backup small forward, OG Anunoby. Patrick McCaw really hasn't proven himself. You know, Patrick McCaw is really impressed on the defensive end. Passing ability to fit into an offense, but where he really struggles is putting the ball in the hoop. And I think Malcolm Miller is kind of the opposite. You know, it's not that he's bad at these other areas, you know, playmaking, all these sorts of things, but he can put the ball in the hoop. And that's something that the Toronto Raptors need out of their bench players. You know, especially with, we don't have too many crazy elite scores coming off the bench in the wing positions. You know, Norm can score, but he's more of a 2-guard. I'm talking more of the 3 of the 4 positions. Serge Ibaka and Fred can put the ball in the hoop, but we really need that wing guy. to score the basketball for the Toronto Raptors, especially because, we saw it in the one game after this trade against the Atlanta Hawks. Pascal Siakam had to do everything. He had to stay on the court the whole game pretty well because we didn't have really a guy that we could count on to put the ball in the hoop in the backup small forward, power forward position. I think that's an area Malcolm Miller might be able to fulfill. So I like the signing of Malcolm Miller. Let me know what you guys think. I know a lot of people were upset when we waived him over the summer because he showed a bit of promise with the team last season. Obviously, it was due to the injury, and we wanted our 9th and 12th, 12th, 13th, 14th men to be healthy. So now he gets his chance that he's healthy. So let me know what you guys think of Malcolm Miller in the description, not in the description, the comment section below. And now let's get into the more fun player, the bigger name, so to speak, Ben McLemore. He was just waived by the Sacramento Kings. Obviously, the Kings have been overperforming all year. And unfortunately for Ben McLemore, the Kings have just had breakout seasons from a lot of their shooting guard players. They're guys that would play the same position as Ben McLemore. Buddy Hield is, aside from Pascal Siakam, probably the most improved player in the league. Iman Shumpert came back from injury. Obviously, he was just traded for an upgrade in Harrison Barnes. So Ben McLemore would get less minutes with the Kings now going forward. Bogdan Bogdanovic has played really well. Yogi Ferrell plays the 2 a lot for them when he's on the court with De'Aaron Fox, and De'Aaron Fox obviously a point guard. So there's a lot of guys on that roster that took minutes away from Ben McLemore, and they've been playing really well. So it's unfortunate for him. He really didn't get too much run this season. He played about 8 minutes a game, only played 19 games throughout the year, didn't start any of them, averaged about 4 points per game in those stretches. But the one really intriguing stat from Ben McLemore, and obviously it's a smaller sample size, but he really upped his three-point shooting ability this season, shooting 41% from the three-point line on about 2 attempts per game in the games that he played. So not the hugest sample size at all. His career average is about 35-36% from 3, but that's a very solid number. Now, obviously, Ben McLemore came into the league as one of the highly touted prospects. I remember during draft night, there's rumors that he might go number 1 overall. I believe that was the draft with Anthony Bennett. So, I guess he's outperformed the number 1 overall pick that season. Certainly a toss-up, but he's still in the league at least. It's not a high bar, but he had a very solid season for the Memphis Grizzlies last year, and I was a bit surprised to see him completely fall off the map, because a lot of NBA teams can use three-point shooters, and as I mentioned earlier, the Sacramento Kings have had a lot of breakout players, so there wasn't really a role for Ben McLemore to fulfill, but I think this is a solid pickup for the Toronto Raptors. Now, the main guy that everyone's been talking about was Wayne Ellington, was the player that, Toronto Raptors fans, and myself included, really wanted to see, but McLemore kind of fills that role, that same type of player. Most of the shots he shoots are from behind the three-point line. We're getting him for very cheap. He's on a 10-day contract. And if he can come in and just knock down shots, that's going to be extremely valuable for this Toronto Raptors team. We need players to come off the bench and be able to hit threes. That's why I really like these 2 pickups of Malcolm Miller and Ben McLemore. Norman Powell, he's been having a breakout season, but obviously he's not the most reliable three-point shooter. He's more of a slasher than a jump shooter, even though he's capable of doing both. When we need three-point shots off the bench, I think you can kind of rely on Ben McLemore to come in and give you that. From what I hear, the quick little bit of research I've done on Ben McLemore, apparently his defense is a bit underwhelming at times, because he's a very solid athlete, but doesn't really translate into defensive efficiency, a lockdown defender, but certainly a solid athlete. So maybe in a Toronto Raptors system where he's surrounded by guys like Kawhi Leonard, Danny Green, all these types of lockdown D guys, maybe he'll elevate his performance. And that's the one thing about Ben McLemore. This is why he's a bit more intriguing than Malcolm Miller, because his raw talent is something that's still really intriguing for a team, and he's never really played on a team that's as strong as the Toronto Raptors, especially at developing players and these sorts of things. The Kings, obviously the first 4 years of his career were absolutely abysmal. They were letting go of talent left, right, and center. Then he got traded to the Memphis Grizzlies, and obviously last season the Memphis Grizzlies really struggled, and they were dealing with so many injuries, so he's never really had a core group of guys around him. And this season, the Kings got better, but unfortunately for him, a lot of the players that got better were playing his position, so he didn't get much run with the roster. So maybe with DeLon Wright gone and the Raptors in need of some shooting off the bench, maybe he'll get some minutes for the Toronto Raptors and show why he was such a highly touted prospect so many years back. He's only 25, which is older. He's by no means a young player in the league anymore, but he still has a lot of room to grow. His second season, he averaged 12 points per game on really efficient shooting, and even last year, he averaged 8 points per game. So I think he could certainly come in and be a guy that plays minutes for this Toronto Raptors team. That's not buried in the bench, and certainly if someone's injured, I trust him as a 10th, 11th guy more than I did probably Lorenzo Brown or these types of players. I'm really interested to see if he gets minutes, will that 3-point percentage stay the same in a higher volume of attempts? Because the Toronto Raptors this season, the issue hasn't been getting good 3-point looks. Because people, the eye test shows, and you can probably look at the stats about how many open threes the Toronto Raptors get, we get a lot of open shots. It's just we haven't been able to knock them down. Kawhi can drive in the lane, Lowry's been driving the lane, kicking out to guys. Danny Green's been really our most consistent 3-point shooter, but outside of that, and obviously Kawhi, who's a complete superstar, but outside of those players, we haven't really had a consistent knockdown 3-ball shooter this season. So obviously Ben McLemore is probably not the most accurate reflection of NBA player consistency, but his 3-point percentage is very high. And it's a skill despite his ups and downs in other areas of his career, in terms of defending, scoring, slashing, dribbling, all these sorts of things. One thing that's stayed pretty stable is that he's a good NBA shooter. He's compared to Ray Allen coming out of the draft, which is certainly a very high comparison. Obviously, he did not live up to that, but he can certainly shoot the 3-ball. And that's a skill the Toronto Raptors need. They needed to address during this buyout market. We still have a few more roster spots to fill. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what Ben McLemore can do. Now he'll be competing with the likes of Jordan Lloyd and Patrick McCaw for those backup wing positions, and I could see Ben McLemore coming out on top of that. Jordan Lloyd has shown some stuff, but he looks a bit out of control while he's out there, and Patrick McCaw, I've actually been pretty happy with his play, but scoring the ball, you want Patrick McCaw to, if he's going to be out there doing the defense and all that, he can't be a complete liability on the offensive end. So it's going to be interesting. It's certainly going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be crazy to see who Masai Ujiri looks at next, because we have all these roster spots to fill if these guys remain on these 10-day contracts. Let me know what you guys think of these pickups. Should the Toronto Raptors sign these guys for the rest of the season? Are you excited by any of these pickups, or are there any more people in the buyout market that you're going to be interested in? Definitely stay tuned to the Raptors Digest. We're going to have a breakdown on the full buyout market coming in the next couple days. Other players the Toronto Raptors could sign, but Masai Ujiri's already out here making moves before we can tell you who's even on the table. So shout out to Masai, shout out to the Toronto Raptors, and shout out to you guys for making it this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. Marc Gasol is apparently supposed to come play tonight against the New York Knicks as of recording. I don't know if it's confirmed yet, but the word on the street is he's playing, so I'm excited to see that. Regardless, exciting times to be a Toronto Raptors fan. I'm signing off. Cheers.